Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's community webcast. My name is Kristen Palazzolo, filling in for Melanie Giuliani today. And today's webcast topic is on CA release automation and how to create a release automation shared component. Today's presenter is Walter Guerrero, and he will be presenting a series of slides followed by a live demo. If you have any questions for Walter throughout his presentation, we're going to hold those questions toward the end, and we will ask those questions over the phone. You can feel free to submit those questions in the chat window or the Q&A panel, and I will make sure that we get to them at the end of the webcast. We'll also open it up for live Q&A, so if you'd like and can hold on to the end, we're going to open up the phone line so that you can ask Walter questions over the phone as well. So I'm going to pass it over to Walter now. Thank you, Walter, for doing this today. We're excited to learn more about this topic.
Sure, no problem. All right. Hello, everyone. So today we're going to be covering a very exciting feature that has been in release automation since release 5.50. So we're going to be talking about shared components. So first of all, let's just start moving through the slides. And so this is what we're going to be covering today. You know, what is a shared component? How do you go about creating one? What are the best practices? Code naming conventions, you know, how you troubleshoot a shared component, and how do you import-export a shared component overall. This is very important so you can actually start seeing and using it correctly and how everything is happening here. So before we start doing this, we need to talk a little bit about orchestration of the continuous delivery tool chain. You know, how is it that you can go about doing push-button software deployment, taking it from one end to end. And what shared components help you in this area is that it gives you the ability of creating generic components that can then be made part of the different applications that you are working on and how they're being used. You know, this is where it allows you to have better control, and it allows you to accelerate because you can version the shared component, and it allows you to see how it's going to be used, and it allows you to harness the different release complexities and how this complexity is then reduced to a set of components that are generic in nature and then can be used by the different applications. And specifically, if you're trying to repeat the same thing over and over again. So the first part that we're going to be covering is what is a shared component. Again, it allows you to create logic, deployment logic, that can be created once and can be shared across multiple applications within release automation. And the beauty of this is that a shared component is versioned. It can be versionized. What do I mean by this? Is that there are multiple versions of the shared component. And you can have in application A be using version 1.0, while application B is using version 1.1 or 1.5, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. And shared components, in reality, allows you to have best practices out there. It allows you to define best practices for your organization. And this is actually distributed along common deployment logic overall. That's the beauty of a shared component. So here's some of the guidelines that you will be using a shared component, which uses the same as when you are working with a flow, you know, across multiple applications. You know, how is it that you will go about doing this? Generating generic actions, global artifacts that you're going to be using, because you can define an artifact to be part of a shared component, and coding naming standards that will come across and how this will go about and how this can be used. Here's a typical view of a shared component and what it looks like and what is happening overall out there. In this scenario, you're going to be seeing a shared component view from the process design, and here you'll see that it's just flow. Typical flow, and you just be adding that particular shared component. And you can actually bring in the other component into it. You can drag it across. Again, this is what it looks in the designer UI. A shared component can only be worked on and used on from the rock. That means the designer that is part of the release operation center. That's where you're going to be doing your work on the shared component. And this is the area where it's, you'll be able to do this. You cannot use the heavy automation studio to perform this work. This has to be done through the designer. So let's go about it working into what it will take to create a shared component. Obviously, you need to do the planning, the necessary planning at the shared component. What's it going to do for me? How is it going to do it? Why is it doing some of this stuff? And how we'll go about taking care of all these items. Well, and after that, you need to also plan the type of actions you are going to be using that need to be part of the shared component, and the flows, and any software artifacts. If you're going to be using software artifacts, which ones are those, and how is it going to be assigned, and the server type assignment. What are the server types that are going to be part of the shared component? Is the shared component being designed specifically only for Windows server types, or is the shared component being designed specifically just for web server types? So that's the kind of stuff you have to kind of keep in mind before you design it, because otherwise you're going to get confused and you don't understand what's really going on. Here's basically what the type of planning that you need to create for a component. First thing that you'll need to do is create a flow chart where you will include the different actions and how they say that they're going to be interacting and what is it that they're going to be doing with themselves. Once the shared component has been created, you create a release version, and that's basically what you're going to be make available is, in essence, a release version of the shared component. And he will go about creating a shared component and, what is it that is going to be used. In this example here, I'm just showing you one of the practices that we're using is that we created under the actions a series of additional subfolders. And in those subfolders, we have getters, setters, checkers, generic entries, and then we can create something specific to a web server. In this example is JBoss. So here I can start moving the different actions that I'm going to be using, and by breaking them down into a specific set of folders, it makes it easy for you to understand what's really happening here as of what's being used. You define the parameters to be used here overall, and you set up the environment and the release variables to be used. That's another thing that you can use here as well. Ideally, what I also do is that I add the parameters here that I'm going to be using, and all the stuff that I do is specific to the given set of actions that I'm working with. I do my manipulation of my work through parameters because I'm finding out that I can control a parameter specifically if I'm moving across different versions and different releases, because I may or may not add I may or may not remove a specific parameter from the list as I'm actually working with it. So again, it is important that you set those stuff up that way because it allows you to move it correctly. This is the different parameters, categories that I create for the flows. And given that this is a JBoss type of component, in this particular area, I created a subfolder under the flows called Management, Configuration, and Generic one, depending on what you're trying to accomplish, of course. And by setting it up this way, I can process the global artifacts by creating different subflows and just basically making it behave through that and control the artifact in that way. And what is exactly is a global artifact? Because I keep mentioning this particular word. Global artifact, as you can see here described, is an artifact that has been mapped to a shared component, which can then be ported to different applications in different release automation installations. What do I mean by that? It's, as I'm showing you right there with the arrow, a global artifact basically is being registered and configured to be used with a shared component. And because it's global in nature, it can be shared by multiple applications instead of just being one application just having exclusive use to the particular artifact. Here, it's global and it can be shared by multiple as it's being used, and it's accessed just like a standard component. And the importance here is the portability. It makes the artifact portable, and it allows for the processing of this given artifact to be run from the share component and use all throughout the different release automation applications. All right, the next step is basically assigning a server type. And this is important because this is the type that will be assigned to the global artifact. And that needs to be done there, otherwise the global artifact cannot really be used correctly. So it is important that you pay attention to the type of artifact name, server type name that you're going to be using. Ideally, you would like to use something as generic as possible. It could be, in this example here, using Windows. That's the server type that we're using here. But you can actually call it something that it can be more specific and can be easily identified with the share component. So that's the kind of stuff that we can use and do it later. So now we're moving on. So now we're going to be creating a share component overall here, and once the share component has been created, we can actually share it with a different set of applications that you're actually working out there. And you will actually, in the process design, as we're showing you, we'll step through this fairly quickly as we're going through, and I also like to show you a couple of examples of different share components that I have out there. And here, basically, the way you will do it is that you will assign, you will design the process and you will assign share component to the application, as you see right there. And you will actually go about doing the multiple version. In this example, we have a JBoss, and I just basically select the share component that I want to use here for this area. So some of the best practices for share components. What are these best practices? These best practices basically are, would allow you to improve the quality of the share component and also to improve the portability of the share component, because it is important that the share component be portable and be able to be distributed to multiple RA applications as they exist out there. All right. To avoid confusion, multiple versions. What I do, one of the best practices is that to avoid confusion when I create a distributable zip file at the share component, in essence, I can actually remove the older versions to create a new distributable component, or I can leave those out there. Because what's going to happen too, this is what I want you to keep in mind is that if you're using a share component in a given application, you cannot really remove it because it's presently being used. You can change the version number of it by making the newer version the version that is going to become available for the different applications. But once you attach it to an application that is executing, you cannot really remove that particular release version that you have out there and it could be 3.3 or 4.0. All right. Mapping the artifact types. One of the, like I said before, the beauty of the global artifact is that it allows this particular generic artifact to be distributed across multiple applications. And it will make your job easier when you're actually using the share component, when you're actually trying to manipulate artifacts, specifically if your share component deals with artifact manipulation. So if it doesn't exist, when you bring it into a new RA installation, this particular artifact will be automatically created for you. But it's recommended that you keep the name as generic as possible so you can actually see it as it's going across. But if you need a specific one, a specific artifact type, we include in the release notes. When you actually share this, it's highly recommended that you include a release note package on it so people understand, okay, when they go read the release notes, all right, this is basically what I need to do in regards to creating or making sure that I don't have this particular name being used for the global artifacts overall. Another item that you need to be aware of, what's one of the best practices is that it's good to create checkers, getters, generics, and setters. This is important because if you do this, then you'll be able to see what are my setters, what are my getters. Specifically, if you're making changes via an action to say, okay, I need you to set this value before we do the run for the specific technology. That's where it becomes important. And it's easier to see, and this is very important for maintainability and readability. Mostly maintainability, because if you design and develop the share component and maybe 2 months down the road, you're asked to make changes to it or enhance it and make it even better, by having this particular subfolders, you will get a better understanding of what's really going on within the share component. And you won't be so confused as to what's really happening here. Another thing is understanding the flow of the the flows that are part of the share component. Do name them very clearly as of what this flow is actually doing. For example, here we're doing the deployment of the application and checking the application and seeing how the different application settings are running and why those application settings are performing those entries there. So given that stuff is actually performing there, it is important that you break it down and make sure that you have all the stuff defined correctly and performing at the right mode. And by doing that, you'll be able to maintain this and be able to read it perfectly, especially when you come to user support later on. All right, here is a generic flow that that can be created, especially if you're doing repetitive actions. In this example here that I'm showing you, I created a flow that what I'm doing here is, remember the getters that I'm saying and the setters? Well, here's an example of a getter that is in the back, where I'm just basically finding the home there for JBoss. And this is generic, that has to be done for everybody. So given that it is a getter, the same with the extraction that I need to have out there, it's easy for me just to see and create a very generic flow. In this case, this flow is only doing 2 steps. Get the home, extract the home, and pass it on to a parameter on a needed basis. Here, in this particular other example, where I'm checking the status, you can see that I'm calling the first flow that you saw, which is set in the home. This is all generic, and you reduce the complexity of a given at the big flow that you're creating here by creating little subflows and just bringing the little subflows and making it part of your bigger generic flow. And like, for example, here you can see that I'm doing the checkup status, and I created one little flow, and then went ahead and create this little flow, gave me the information that I was looking for. Then I'm using all the getters and setters to actually extract the application and make that particular flow just define and make it easier to read on what's happening. Now, loops in the flow. This becomes very important when you are working with global artifact types, because the global artifact types uses a collection. You will actually set the flow, which is what is showing you right here at this level right here. I'm sorry, but I'm trying to use the pointer. Give me a second. What is showing you right here at this level, hopefully my pointer is working. Right there, that is showing that it actually has a loop. What the loop that is being set up here is based on the collection type, because the global artifacts are working at the collection level. So by creating a flow that will work through this particular artifact type, it allows you to process the given artifacts that you're trying to use fairly easy. And here's another best practice that you can actually do, and I strongly recommend that you set up Boolean values as the mechanism to define if the particular flow has completed successfully or not. In this example right here, going back again to the checkup status. And here, basically, I did the same thing all over again, where I'm actually checking the status of the app to see if the app is up and running in JBoss. If it's up and running, then we set the value here that I'm actually coming out. We'll set a value that we're saying that this particular app is running. So we set it to true. And if it's not running, we set it to false. So when the next flows come in, they basically look at those parameters that I have defined out there and use that information in the parameters to decide what the next step is going to be. I'm sorry, I think we're having an issue here. Okay, sorry, it took a while for the screen to refresh. Let me go back one screen. Hold on. Okay, those are blank screens. All right, so here's another set of shared components overall that we can also do. And part of the best practice to improve the readability of the shared component is, sorry, this is a repeat of what we just talked about. Apologize for that. Now we're going to talk about the naming convention overall and the different shared components. It is important that, like I mentioned before, that you provide meaningful names to the components, the flows, the parameters, and the collections that you're going to be using that are going to be part of the shared components. And the way that we define this to use this correctly is that we're using a lower camel casing. What do I mean by that? Is that the first letter of each embedded word is lowercase. For example, the example that we're giving here is that in our case, the name should start with the company name for parameters will become something like this, underscore, company name, parameter scope. So you will get an understanding of what is really going on. Here's a more descriptive example of what we're talking about. Here's basically how we name the component. In case it's the company name, will be CA underscore for CA Technologies. That once we provide the share component for you, it will be called something like this. And the whole example here will be CA underscore JBoss. So then you know that this came from this share component came from CA, and that's how basically it needs to be described in that area. And for flows, again, it would be like CA flow JBoss. And this example that you see below is basically we're calling it, because it's a JBoss start, so I'm calling it CA flow JBoss start. So I know that it is a flow based on the JBoss technology set, and I'm doing a start overall. But I'm starting with the company name, so I don't get any confusion as to what the company name is and how it's being used. For the parameters, we're going to end up with the underscore company name and the parameter scope. For example, here in this case, we're showing you multiple examples where the internal has no entry, user input has a U, environment has an E, and release has an R. So with 4 examples that you see right there, we have demo underscore CAE, demo number underscore CAR, and tester underscore CA because it's internal, nothing changes. Test number underscore CAU for a user input that is going to be required for the different parameters. So we're moving on. And for global artifacts, basically the way I would like to name this, it will be the share component. In this case, it's JBoss, and the artifact type. In this example right here will be JBoss apps, JBoss config. If you're going to be doing different configuration values, so in this example, I created 2 artifact types that are being used here for this area. Okay, hold on. I'm trying to move on to the next page. So in this section, summary entry there. So we're moving on to the troubleshooting share components. How would you go about troubleshooting a share component? That basically, this is done by following these particular steps. What if a revision number of a share component is not automatically assigned? Well, you need to determine, what it will be the best revision number for you to use. In my example, I'm using version 1.0, but if I do a minor revision, obviously I'm going to go to 1.1 with a nice description and create a branch associated with that. But you determine what it will be the best sequence for you to use. if it is a major revision that you're making, that you're changing the complete flow of the share component, then at that point you will make it like a 2.0. Another problem that you may be encountering, it may be around the global artifact type. Remember that once the share component has been configured to be used with a given array application, that the global artifact type needs to be mapped to a server type that is assigned properly for that given application. Because if you don't map it correctly, you are not going to be able to see the collection as it shows up in the share component and not be able to use it correctly at that point in time. So it is important that you map it properly, that you have a share component value. Parameters and values cannot be added at the process and the flow level for a share component. So this is the main reason why I'm being actually saying that you should use parameters as much as possible at the action level and just update the parameter values as needed as the particular share component flows are executing as you make it part of the main share component, at the main application that is going to be using this. So it is important that you define them correctly in that way. Excuse me for a second. I'm trying to bring up a system right now that we are going to be using. So finally, we are going to be talking about basically is share components. How is it that you go about moving the share components between different array installations that you may have in your organization? Because I know that a lot of our customer base has a dev system and a production system where they do all the work in the dev system and then they actually have to move all this work over to the production system. Share components can be exported and imported. This provides you with the flexibility, as I was mentioning, of doing all your work in a development system, but keeping everything away from your production system. And after you have tested everything, then you move the share component with the application in tow, via zip files, of course, into the production array environment. You may need to export multiple share components into a single zip file package. That will be up to you how you actually perform this. You will be making that decision, and as of what is it that you need to do in that area, and how you will go about exporting that information there on an as-needed basis. So the import-export is wizard-driven. The applications are basically created in the array server, and from there you basically bring them in and perform the work that you need to perform. And basically, hold on. Okay, it's not going to work. And actually rename the file as you're actually going to be exporting it. In my case, I like to use the word export, and I say array, the version number of array, /share component, and the version number of the share component that I'm actually exporting. That way you understand exactly what is being named. And that basically covers the whole scenario as of what we're doing in that area right there. And right now I need to share my desktop so I can show you, give you a demo exactly how this whole thing works. Are there any questions while I set this up and bring this in overall?
I don't see any yet. Just a reminder for everyone, if you have a question, please post it in the chat window or the Q&A panel, and I'll make sure those get to Walter for him to answer.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see it.
All right. Here's an example of a share component that has been created for testing based off the TDM setup. And as you can see, all the stuff that I've been talking about, there have been multiple revisions of the share component, starting with revision 1.0, which is the root of it, at the bottom here, and then it moves on to the super user, and overall, and it starts showing you the different changes that happens. You'll be able to see the different history. In this example, the artifact types associated with it is basically the app test configuration, the staging doc, and the EAR file that is going to be used. And all that stuff was created. And as I was telling you about, here are the 3 artifacts that were actually built. And here are the 2 environment variables that are being used. And here's basically the application with the different environment variables and the release configuration entries. This information becomes very handy because based on the environment that you're working on, you can actually change the different configuration path as to what's happening with the different application entries when you're actually working with the app. So I can actually drill down into this particular example, and as you can see here, as we were talking about, this particular app is doing a flow, and this flow basically has a loop. And this loop is based off the collection, and the collection that it's working on is the app environment collection. So this right here, the app test environment, contains a series of entries that is a collection. So it's looking at that, and it will execute this particular test multiple times based on what's going on. And remember how we were talking that you have to use environment variables to actually control what is happening with the shared component, because you cannot really directly update this particular flow yourself or the process as you will actually be able to do that in array. So therefore, you have to pass environment variables when everything is going on here. And we're using the same format here where you're passing if the test case failed, so it will tell you what's going on or not. It just needs to be expanded more into a get and a setter overall. So that's what this particular share component does. It's very simple. It's not that complicated. Also, another thing that you can do as we're working with this different share component, let's say that we have a series of applications here that we may want to use. And for example, we have like a web services application. And in this particular component, in the web services applications, we may want to do, let me see what this one does. All right, this will be very simple. So here, this particular application that I have created with a different release manifest and the different items that I can use, I can turn around and I can say, you know what? I want to make this component a shared component. And I can turn around, I can come here and create a shared component based off this debug. But there are some conditions. Before we can create this, we have to use no built-in application parameters, and the flows that should not contain or be executed, in a remote server. There should be no overridden values at all, for this to work. So let's see if we can actually work this. This is something that came from one of the different testing scenarios that I've been using. So right now it's actually creating a share component. And so far so good in the creation of the share component based off an existing application. And now I'm going to go create another one too that is going to be doing some basic stuff, like looping and moving stuff around overall. So let's see what happens here when it finishes off the creation of the share component. Given that it has multiple areas. But this is one way that you can use this for the actual creation of this item, where you do initiate your work as a component, a regular component, and as long as you can keep within those rules, no built-ins, no overridden values, and you are not executing on a remote server, you can grab any component that you have created for your application and make that a shared component automatically for you. So those are the kinds of things that you can do with this system. Let's see what it's doing. As you can see, it's telling us it's going to take a while to create that share component overall right there. While that's executing, let's go grab another system that I already have set up, and we'll see what we can do there in that system. All right, here's another system that I already have set up. And here in this area, I'm just going to come in. I'm going to go into Share Components. I'm going to log in again. I'm going to come in. I'm going to go into share components. And here we have a couple more extra share components that were created. As you can see, I have something for SV, where I can see the different areas and how the SV was created. This is very simple. Again, also it's running on a loop. It's running on virtual services in that particular collection. And we have a deployed virtual services as well. And these are, again, multiple share components. And we have a test data management, a TDM component, share component also. And it tells you exactly what's going on here. So if I come up here, it's telling me that I have only 2 versions of this, and it's working on a EAR file. And for service visualization, again, the map artifact type is that. And for this one, if we have multiple artifact files that are being used. But in this scenario, let's just create a share component. Simple share. And we're going to call it 1.0. And once we create it, it's going to give me 1.0, and it's giving me the basic information on it. I can rename it, I can commit it. I haven't committed it yet, so it's not going to become available to other systems. So here, we're going to add just a delay, very simple. And also we're going to add a file check. So we're going to do a very simple file check. So we're just going to check if file folder exists. And here, then we're going to create a simple flow. Then we're going to create what's called a delay loop. And within this delay loop, we're going to create a loop, and we're going to create a for while loop, and the maximum number is going to be 3. So once we create that, then we're going to grab the delay, and we're going to throw one in here. We're going to throw a second one. So this creates our delay loop with multiple connections. So we create this very quickly, and we save it. So we have that delay loop, and then we create another one, which is a file check. And then we save it. And here in the file check, we're going to create a delay first, and we're going to check the file, see if it exists. So again, very simple share component with 2 entries. So after we created that, so we come to the file share, and if we actually go to the process designed, and then the basic demo, and here basically I want to add a share component. I want to assign a share component. The one that I just created is not available. The only one that I can actually assign is this virtual one, that is actually available. So I can come back to share components, to my share one, click down here, and I commit the share component. So now we have committed it, and the share component now is going to become available. Notice that I didn't create any artifact types overall here, and I haven't checked this usage. So we can go back to the process design, and here we're going to assign a share component. And now simple share is available, and we'll do assign the version 1.0. So now this component, since this component is now available here, I can actually create a flow, a process flow, that will be able to use the share component that is created and actually execute it fairly quickly. That's, in essence, the power of the share component. So I was using built-ins here, so obviously it's not going to work. So that is basically, in essence, the power of the share components and how it can be used correctly and fairly simple. And if I want to create another, let's say under share components here, we want to branch it because we need to create a new version here. This is what I was talking about, 1.2, additional changes. And we create this particular branch. So now we're going to have 2 versions running here. And in this particular branch, we create a new flow. And this flow is simple delay, because that's basically what I'm doing, just creating one extra entry. And here, I just grab the delay and dump it here. And we save it. Then we come up here, and we make this one a commit. So now that I made that committed one, that's the version that is presently available. So if I come back to the process design, and I can see here that this component options up here is basically 1.0, but I can also unassign it, or I can switch to revision. So if I switch that, I can actually switch over to this version. Instead of being 1.01, I'd right away make it a bit 1.2 available. And this basically has made the additional flow become available here to me. And can also unassign the share component. So if I so choose, I can actually remove it, or I can come back and reassign the share component. I assign the share component again. Now I get to select which version of the share component I want to assign here. In this case, we're going to go start again on 1.0, and we set that up. And if I want to switch this version, notice that there is only 2 flows. So if I want to switch this version, I can come back over here, switch it to the new version of 2.0, and automatically will switch this value to be 3 action items right there. So that's some of the things that you can do, and that's the power of the share component that allows me to create generic enough values and modify them as I see fit and move on from there. Any questions, comments?
I have 2 questions. One is import-export of shared component possible within different versions of CA release automation?
That's a great question. That's a great question. Yes, it is, especially if you're going, let's say, for instance, if you have a share component that is version 6.10, then you can share that component with version 6.2, which is presently available right now. Prior to 6.1, you will need to be at the most at 6.0 for versions from 5.5.1, 5.5.2 to be able to be exported into a 6.0 installation. Once you get to 6.1, you need to be at a minimum of 6.1 to be able to export that share component into the newer versions, which is 6.2 and 6.3, which is 6.3 still in development. Does that answer your question?
Great, thank you. Also have a question. Oh, someone had just requested to join the audio line. Go ahead and do that, and I can unmute it for you if you'd like. But another question that came in the Q&A is there a way to generate a report to see which version of shared component is being used by which application?
Yes, there is a usage functionality on the share component. So if you come down to the share component, simple share, see the usages right here? It will tell you where it's being used and who's using it in this example.
We can't see your screen right now.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I'm sorry. Hold on. Let me share my screen again. I apologize for that.
It's okay.
Get too excited about this stuff. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. All right. So, oh man, I'm sorry. I just got a phone call from my daughter in South Africa, so I'm gonna have to talk to her in a few minutes. Anyways, can you hold on, please?
Yeah, right. I'll hold on one second. Go ahead and put yourself
on. So anyways, now I just told her that I'm calling her in a minute. So anyways, basically what I did was I was I'm in the wrong screen. Okay. This is the wrong screen too. Hold on, I have multiple screens going on. All right, so what I did is I came back to the designer and I highlighted this share component in question. And at this, see it right here on the right-hand side, this will give you the usage of who's using the share component. In this example, basic demo is using version 1.2. So what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to go to the process automation. And I have I have agents updates, upgrades, okay? Here, this one, let me see, upgrades. No, let me use the cars app. So you can see what I'm talking about. So here I'm going to go to the web component, all right? at the web component level, at this particular process, I'm going to assign a share component. I'm going to assign simple share. I'm going to assign 1.2. So I assign this right here. So now the share component is part of the cars application. Okay? So we go back to the share component. We look over here and we look at the usage. Now it's telling me that it's being used in these two applications, basic demo and cars application. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it looks good. Thank you. Another question came in. One of the limitations says we can't run one remote server. What does that mean? They wrote remote,
okay.
but I think she meant remote, or he meant remote.
Remote.
Yeah.
What that means is that the way RA is implemented, right? RA basically sends the work to be done at a given RA agent installation. So in essence, he's moving all the logic for that given application, for the application deployment, based on server type to the RA agent. So it's going to execute in that agent right there locally to that agent, to that environment. There are ways, there are actions out there that allows you to execute to a remote server. For example, a PowerShell component. What that means is that within share components, you cannot really do that. That's a limitation of it, where you're not going to be able to execute the remote share component call or like a party session going from one machine that is running the RA agent to another machine to perform the call. Does that answer your question?
It looks like it did, yes. Thank you.
Okay.
Were there any other questions? That was the last one that I saw come through. I will be posting the replay to the Release Automation community later today or tomorrow. And if you think of any other questions, you can comment in the community, and I'll make sure Walter gets to those as well.
Oh, yeah. I'm always out there. I'm always watching. Okay. So thank you, everyone, for taking some time of your day, your busy days, to listen to this presentation in regards to what share components do and how powerful they are in helping you develop generic components to be used by different release automation applications.
Nikhil said, he said can he see an example of it? He did not understand what is not allowed.
Okay. Here's an example of it. I was trying to do the debug, and basically this one failed because I was using some built-in parameters, like right here. I was using some of this information, these built-in parameters, to actually do some work within these actions on or flows down here. So I cannot really use any of that, and that basically is going to cause it to do some work. See this right here? Some of this stuff is being used, like application ID, job name. You cannot really use that in a share component. That's an example of it. And that's basically why it stopped you. It will stop you from actually using that and developing. So if you go to the share component section, this is the wrong implementation, the wrong one too, right here. If you go here and start working on the flows, basically you see that there are only a few built-in parameters that you can use when you're trying to convert an actual component into it, because it causes a lot of problems. That's that's basically what the limitation is all about. It's the conversion. Does that answer your question?
Nikhil, if you can just comment and let us know if that answered your question, that'd be great.
I will post a better example online so you guys you can see what I'm talking about.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. Thank you, Walter, so much for presenting today, and we hope that everyone will join us again for the next community webcast on CA release automation.
Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, and look forward to talking to you later on.
Bye-bye.
Bye.